My name is Emily Hale, and the night I turned 15 was the night I learned what it meant to be unwanted. Not quietly, not privately, but violently, publicly, and under the cold eyes of an entire town. People say childhood ends slowly, like leaves falling one by one. For me, it ended in a single moment, sharp as a blade. Kingsport, the coastal town where I grew up, always carried the scent of salt and steel. The wind rolled in from the Atlantic with a harshness that scraped across the skin, a reminder that the sea had shaped everything here. Our days, our work, our lives, and for the Hale family, our wealth. From the balcony of the mansion, I could see Kingsport docks, the empire of cargo ships, cranes and roaring engines my father ruled over with an iron fist. The docks were his kingdom, the town his subjects, and I was the mistake he never forgave himself for making. That evening, the mansion was dressed in gold. Chandeliers lit every corner, laughter spilled into the hallways, and the sound of clinking glasses echoed through the garden. It was supposed to be a celebration, the 35th anniversary of Hale Marine Logistics. People from all over the coast poured in, wearing expensive smiles and speaking in voices polished from years of pretending. I stood near the staircase trying to be invisible, even though invisibility was a luxury I had never been granted in this house. My father, Richard Hale, moved through the room like a storm in a tailored suit. Tall, silver-haired, severe. Everything about him demanded obedience. Where he walked, conversations faltered. When he spoke, people leaned in to listen. In Kingsport, Richard Hale was something between a god and a threat. Beside him was Linda, my stepmother, perfect in every superficial way. Flawless skin, elegant dress, lips that curled into a smile made of sugar and poison. She always watched me the way people watch a crack in a window, irritated that it exists, terrified it might spread. To her, I was the ghost of a woman who came before her, a reminder she wished she could erase, and she would that night. I felt it before it happened, a tightening in the room, a shift in the air, the kind of silence that falls right before lightning strikes. My father disappeared for a moment, and when he returned, something dangled from his hand, my suitcase. Blue, cheap, ugly. The one I used when I spent summers at my aunt's house before Linda banned me from going. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses hovered in frozen hands. People turned toward him as if someone had pulled the world off its axis. He descended the stairs with slow, deliberate steps. I stared at the suitcase, then at him, trying to understand. But the answer came too quickly. He tossed it. Hard. It hit the ground at my feet with a thud that echoed through my chest. My breath caught. My fingers shook. I could feel every pair of eyes in the courtyard stabbing into my skin. Curiosity, pity, hunger. They all wanted to witness the spectacle of a powerful man destroying something weaker. When my father finally spoke, his voice was cold and surgical. "You are not a Hale." The words carved through the air like a blade. Gasps rippled through the crowd. He stepped closer, towering over me, his shadow swallowing mine. "Get out of my house!" Not yelled, not spat, just delivered, with a calmness that made it even more brutal. Linda stood behind him, unmoving, but her eyes glimmered with triumph. A queen watching the execution she had orchestrated. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it was trying to escape my chest. I searched my father's face for something. Anger, regret, hesitation. Anything that hinted I mattered. But there was nothing. Only emptiness. "You never belonged here," he added. Final. Irrevocable. A murmur rolled through the crowd, some shocked, some entertained, most too afraid to speak. I tried to swallow the tears burning in my throat, but they tasted like betrayal, like salt, like the sea. I bent down, grabbed the handle of my suitcase with a trembling hand, and turned away. The mansion loomed behind me, glowing warm and bright, while the cold wrapped its arms around me like a shroud. That was when the sky opened. Rain poured down in heavy sheets, drenching me instantly. Thunder cracked above my head. The wind slapped against my face, but I kept walking, each step slower, heavier, until the world around me blurred into streaks of water and light. From a distance, it must have looked like a movie in slow motion, a small girl walking away from a house that never wanted her, with the storm tearing through the sky, as if it, too, was furious. My shoes sank into the mud, my clothes clung to my skin, my hair dripped over my eyes, but none of it hurt as much as the memory of my father's voice. "You're not a Hale." Every repetition felt like a punch. Every echo felt like a wound reopening. I stopped in the middle of the road, chest rising and falling rapidly, rain mixed with tears until I couldn't tell them apart. My entire body trembled, not from cold, but from something else, something sharper, something awakening. I lifted my face toward the mansion, the place that cast me out like trash, the place that decided I didn't matter. And inside me, a vow formed, quiet at first, then strong enough to steady my breathing. One day, you will look up at me, not because I needed his approval, not because I wanted to return, but because power changes direction. And the world has a strange way of making kings kneel. That night did not break me. It created me. Emily Hale died in the rain, but someone else was born. Someone who would rise so high that even Richard Hale would have to shield his eyes. And this is where my revenge begins. I was 15 years old the night my father threw my life into the mud. 15, and already branded a disgrace. The memory of that rain-soaked walk out of the Hale estate, the crowd of villagers watching, the echo of Richard Hale's voice cracking through the storm, still clung to me like salt on the ocean wind. I remember gripping my torn suitcase, rainwater mixing with tears on my cheeks, and whispering to myself a promise so sharp it almost cut my tongue. One day, you will look up at me. But promises don't warm your hands at night. Promises don't feed you. And promises don't stop a 15-year-old girl from trembling alone in a world that has already decided she is nothing. That was the end of the girl who begged for love, and the beginning of the girl who would learn to survive. The first night after being cast out of the Hale mansion, the town felt like a different universe. Kingsport, the wealthy coastal village that gleamed in postcards, revealed its darker underbelly once the sun went down. The ocean wind, always thick with salt, turned sharp and cold as it slid through the empty alleys between warehouses. Every echo of a ship's horn from the docks felt like a reminder of the world I no longer belonged to. His world, Richard Hale's world, where power was inherited and cruelty was tradition. I found shelter in an abandoned storage shed behind the northern pier. The door didn't close properly, the roof leaked, and rats scurried across the dusty floorboards. But it was 4 walls, and that was enough. I curled up on a pile of old sacks that smelled of mildew and engine oil. Every distant sound, the grind of shipping cranes, the clank of metal hooks, the deep rumble of cargo ships docking, was a reminder of the life I'd been exiled from. Kingsport docks, his empire, sang through the night like a cruel lullaby. I hugged my knees and tried to imagine what it would feel like to be warm again, to be wanted again, to not feel like a mistake walking on 2 legs. But survival has a way of forcing you forward, and in the morning, with my stomach twisting from hunger, I stepped out into the world to look for work. The first place that didn't chase me away was the Blue Harbor Diner, a small restaurant squeezed between a shipyard office and a bait shop. The neon sign flickered, and the windows were fogged with steam from the kitchen. Inside, the smell of fried fish and coffee lingered in the air. The owner, a middle-aged woman named Dora, looked me over with a mix of suspicion and pity when I asked for work. My clothes were still damp, My hair messy, my eyes swollen from the night before. I probably looked like I belonged in a missing persons poster. "You ever wash dishes?" she asked, arms crossed. I nodded, even though the only dishes I had washed before were the crystal plates my stepmother never let me touch. "Fine. You work for tips. Don't break anything. And don't steal." Her tone made it clear she already assumed I would. I took the job anyway. The sink became my universe. Water, soap, steel. My hands cracked from the cold. Grease clung to my sleeves. The floor was always slippery. But every coin I earned felt like a victory carved out of the world with my bare hands. And then I met him. John Marlowe came into the diner nearly every afternoon at the same time, always occupying the same corner booth. He looked like a man carved from years of storms. Silver hair, heavy eyebrows, posture stiff from a lifetime of responsibility. Rumor had it he once owned a massive logistics company until a tragic accident forced him into early retirement. He watched people the way a captain watches the horizon, quietly, attentively, as if waiting for danger. One day, when I delivered his coffee, he asked, "How old are you, kid?" 15. "You in school?" "No," I replied, scrubbing a stain off the table. "Not anymore." He studied me, eyes narrowing, not in judgment but in recognition, as if he saw something familiar in the cracked, hungry version of myself. "Come here after your shift," he said. "I want to talk." I expected a warning, or pity, or worse. Those kinds of propositions older men sometimes make to girls who have no safety nets. But instead, John brought out a stack of books: Basic English Grammar, a beginner's business textbook, a notebook with clean, crisp pages. "You're a smart girl," he said. "I've watched you. You don't complain, you don't slack off, and you work like someone who refuses to drown. That kind of fire, it can take you far, if you let it." I stared at the books, unsure how to respond. No adult had spoken to me like that before, not even my parents. So I showed up the next day. And the day after. John became my lighthouse. He taught me how to speak up, how to calculate numbers in my head, how to read contracts, how the shipping world worked, from cargo manifests to negotiation tactics. He drilled into me the basics of discipline, time management, and critical thinking. "You have to understand the game if you ever want to beat the people who play it," he said. Those words, I carved them into my heart. Months passed. I grew stronger, inside and out. I worked harder. I saved every penny. I learned to stop flinching when people mention my father's name. But hate has a way of finding you, no matter how far you run. One evening, as I was stacking dishes, the diner door swung open with a violent force. The wind blew in first. Then came my stepmother, Linda, wearing her signature fox fur coat and a smirk sharp enough to slice skin. Behind her stood Richard Hale, towering, cold, and furious. Dora's face drained of color. The customers went silent. Linda held up a bracelet. Her bracelet, expensive, glittering, something I had never touched in my life. "She stole it," Linda declared, pointing at me like I was an animal. I knew it. Trash will always be trash. My breath caught. My hands shook. "I didn't—" Richard stepped forward, his voice booming. "You shame this town, you shame my name, and you dare show your face here?" I looked at him, waiting, hoping, for even a flicker of humanity. There was none. "You're not a Hale," he spat. "You never were." The same words he threw at me the night he threw me out. Around us, the diners watched in stunned silence. Some looked sorry, others looked entertained, but no one defended me. No one dared, except John Marlowe. "That girl didn't steal anything," he said, rising from his booth. His voice, though gravelly, cut through the room like a blade. "And you know it." Richard turned to him, eyes burning. "Stay out of this." John held his ground. "I've seen thieves, Richard. Emily's not one. But you're a man who confuses pride with power." The tension stretched, thick and electric. Richard leaned closer to me. "If you ever show your face in Kingsport again, you'll regret it." I wanted to scream, to break something. But instead, I swallowed the fire burning in my chest, because I understood something that night. They weren't punishing me for who I was. They were punishing me for who I could become. That night, after my shift, I returned to the abandoned shed one last time. I sat on the floor where I had once cried myself to sleep and realized Kingsport was too small for the woman I needed to become. I didn't pack much, just a few clothes, John's books, and the last $47 I had saved. The bus to New York left at dawn. The station was nearly empty, the sky painted in pale shades of blue and gray. I climbed the steps, the driver barely glancing at me. As I settled into a seat by the window, I looked out at the shadowy shape of Kingsport for the last time. The town was quiet, the ocean was still, and the docks, those towering cranes I once feared, stood like cold steel giants watching me go. As the bus rumbled forward, I whispered my vow again, quietly but with a new strength. One day, you will look up at me. And this time, I didn't say it with desperation. I said it with certainty. The girl who left Kingsport was not the same girl who had arrived in that shed. I had seen darkness. I had tasted humiliation. But I had survived. And survival is the first step toward revenge. New York awaited. So did my future. And so did the beginning of everything I would later become. New York didn't welcome me. It swallowed me whole. The bus rolled into the city just before sunrise, and through the window I saw a skyline made of steel, ambition, and sleepless dreams. Skyscrapers rose like giants, their glass faces glowing orange in the dawn light. Streets buzzed with taxis, sirens, steam rising from the grates. Everyone walked fast, like they were late for the rest of their lives. This wasn't Kingsport. No one here cared about my last name, my past, or what my father thought I was. In New York, all that mattered was whether you could survive. And I intended to. My first home in New York was a rented room in a rundown apartment in Brooklyn. Not much bigger than a closet. The walls were thin enough to hear every argument, every baby crying, every midnight heartbreak coming from the neighbors. The radiator clicked, but didn't heat. The mattress dipped in the middle, but it was mine. The door locked, and nobody could throw me out. I took 2 jobs immediately, then a third. In the mornings, I served coffee at a small cafe near Atlantic Avenue. At noon, I cleaned offices in a midtown corporate building, polishing the glass walls of rooms where powerful people made decisions that shaped the world. At night, I worked the closing shift at a 24-hour deli, slicing cold cuts until my wrists ached. I slept 4 hours a day, sometimes 3, but exhaustion was safer than hunger, and hunger was safer than thinking about Kingsport. Every time I felt like quitting, I remembered Richard Hale's voice echoing in the diner. "You're not a Hale. You never were." Those words became a fuel tank inside me. I wasn't trying to survive just to live. I was surviving to return. John Marlowe kept his promise. Months after I left Kingsport, an envelope arrived at the cafe with my name written in his sharp handwriting. Inside was a note. "Opportunity is a door. You have to kick it open. John." And beneath it, a scholarship form, tuition fully covered, the Marlowe Foundation. I cried in the cafe storage room for 10 minutes straight before I could breathe again. Thanks to John, I enrolled in night classes at a community college that offered business, finance, and introductory programming. It was the first time in my life I sat in a classroom as someone who wanted knowledge, not as someone forced to perform. I devoured everything. I learned how companies raised capital, how markets manipulated human fear, how spreadsheets told stories more honest than people ever did. And late at night, I taught myself to code. Python, SQL, anything that unlocked the invisible machinery behind the digital world. I spent countless nights in the cheap Brooklyn library surrounded by flickering fluorescent lights, absorbing formulas, algorithms, and financial models. My laptop's fan whirred like a jet engine, but it kept running, just like me. There were moments, around 3 a.m.s, when the city finally went quiet, when I wondered if this was what strength felt like. not being unbreakable, but refusing to stay broken. I didn't have a safety net, no family, no inheritance, only a burning drive that felt larger than my own body. New York has two faces, the one tourists take pictures of and the one that chews people alive. Working 3 jobs meant I saw both. Late-night deli shifts introduced me to hustlers, gamblers, broken dreamers whose eyes never stopped scanning the room. Office cleaning put me inches away from CEOs screaming into phones about million-dollar deals. And at the cafe, I served coffee to Wall Street interns who bragged about bonuses bigger than a whole year of my income. I watched greed up close. I watched ambition sharpen itself into weapons. I watched how rumors, alliances, and betrayals built empires. And I studied it all. I realized something fundamental. Power didn't come from strength. Power came from understanding the system well enough to bend it. That was the moment I knew. If I wanted true revenge, real, bone-deep, world-shaking revenge, I needed to dominate the industries that built Kingsport docks, finance, technology, logistics, everything my father took for granted. I didn't just want to win. I wanted to become the storm he never saw coming. The turning point came one rainy afternoon at a co-working space in Manhattan. The Marlowe Scholarship gave me access to a small student co-working hub. Nothing fancy, just long wooden tables, a coffee machine always near empty, and whiteboards cluttered with half-erased equations. But on weekends, the space opened its doors to the public. That's when I met them. A group of young founders, 4 20-somethings crowded around laptops, arguing loudly over algorithms, data pipelines, and something called autonomous maritime routing. Their shirts were wrinkled, their eyes bloodshot, their laptops covered in stickers. I tried not to stare, but one of them noticed, a tall guy with messy hair and the energy of someone who hadn't slept since Tuesday. "You understand logistics?" he asked, raising a brow. "A little," I replied. "I grew up around ports." He laughed. "Same here, except we're trying to replace them." The group was building an AI-powered logistics system, something that could automate cargo tracking, predict delays, optimize shipping routes, and expose inefficiencies that cost the industry billions. And suddenly, everything clicked. Kingsport, Richard Hale, cranes screaming in the night, cargo ships towering over the docks, the empire that threw me away. This was a chance to learn the language of his world and eventually destroy it from the inside. I asked if I could sit and watch. They said yes. Hours passed as they scribbled diagrams, argued about training data, and debated investors. I soaked it all in. The jargon, the tech, the financial models behind startup valuation. They weren't just building software. They were building the future of ports, the future of everything my father believed he controlled. And in that moment, I saw my road clearly for the first time. If I wanted revenge, I couldn't just match Richard Hale. I had to become someone he would never imagine existed. I had to become stronger than his entire empire. I left the co-working space that night with my heart pounding. As I walked through Times Square, neon lights flashing across my face, I felt something powerful rising inside me, a conviction sharp and electric. I didn't want a job. I didn't want a career. I wanted ownership. Authority, a throne I built myself. Startups were risky, brutal, a battlefield with no rules. But I had lived through worse. I had survived Kingsport. I had survived the streets. I had survived myself. So I made my choice. I would build my own company, from nothing, with nothing, but for everything. I went home, opened my laptop, and created a blank document titled, "Why Hydra?" Because when you cut off one head, 2 grow back, just like me. My goal was simple yet impossible: to build a platform that could outthink port managers, outmaneuver shipping giants, and expose the cracks in old money dynasties like Hale Maritime Holdings. I wrote my mission statement in one long breath. To rebuild the ocean trade network using intelligence, transparency, and speed, and to bury corrupt empires under their own inefficiencies. I started sketching wireframes, mapping out algorithms, drafting business models, designing dashboards, researching investors, sharpening myself into someone unstoppable. My hands trembled as I typed, not from exhaustion, but from clarity. This wasn't just about money, not even about logistics. It was about rewriting the story that began the night Richard Hale threw me into the rain. The girl he abandoned would rise, and she wouldn't just reclaim power, she would redefine it. New York hadn't welcomed me, but it had forged me. I wasn't the scared 15-year-old anymore. I wasn't the girl sleeping in a warehouse. I wasn't the dishwasher hiding from her past. I was Emily Hale, and I was learning the way of the strong. The world had no idea what was coming, but soon, very soon, it would. Failure doesn't arrive like thunder. It arrives quietly at first, an ignored email, a meeting cut short, a laugh you pretend not to hear. But then it builds, piece by piece, until one morning you wake up and realize it's everywhere, covering your life like ash after a fire. My first startup, the one I believed would shake the world, began dying long before I admitted it. The first pitch meeting should have been a victory. I had spent months building wireframes, scraping data sets, researching maritime regulations, and preparing financial projections so carefully they felt like pieces of my own bones. I walked into that venture capital office with my heart pounding but steady, convinced I could make them see it. The future I saw so clearly. I walked out with nothing, not even a maybe. The investor, a man in his 50s with slicked back hair and the kind of watch whose price could pay my rent for a year, didn't even bother hiding his amusement. "So let me get this straight," he said, leaning back. "You're what, 17, 18? And you're telling me you can rebuild global port efficiency?" His voice dripped with condescension. "I can improve it significantly," I said, keeping my chin up. "Oh, I'm sure you believe that." He smirked. "But the maritime sector isn't a toy sandbox for ambitious teenagers." He didn't even look at the demo I stayed up 3 nights straight to refine. "Come back when you have a real team. And maybe when you look less like a high school student trying to impress her guidance counselor." I felt something inside me flicker. Anger or humiliation, I couldn't tell. When I left the building, the sky was gray, matching the heaviness in my chest. Rain tapped lightly against the sidewalk as if the city were mocking me. That was the moment I learned something crucial. New York doesn't care about your dreams, only results. The financial storm hit shortly after. My savings evaporated faster than I expected. Rent, transportation, 2 meals a day, server costs for my prototype, cloud computing fees, business registration, all bleeding me dry. I tried to keep up by taking extra shifts at the deli, but exhaustion began choking me like a vine around my throat. One night, while running the numbers on my spreadsheet, I realized I wouldn't make rent that month. The panic was instant and icy. I had 2 choices. 1, let my landlord throw me out. 2, sell the only valuable thing I owned, my laptop, my lifeline, my window into the future, the heart of my startup. I stared at it for a long time. The keys were worn smooth from months of spreadsheets, lines of Python and business plans. Every dream I had touched that keyboard, but dreams don't pay rent. So I carried it to a pawn shop on Fulton Street. The owner, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, examined it, shrugged, and said, $200. It was worth at least 5 times that, but desperation kills your bargaining power. "Okay," I whispered. When he removed the laptop from my hands, it felt like he was peeling away a part of my future. That night, I slept on the apartment floor, unable to close my eyes, feeling the weight of failure sitting on my chest like a stone. 2 days later, I saw him. My father. Not in person, on TV. I was wiping tables in the cafe when a customer pointed at the mounted television. "Hey, that's Richard Hale, right? Kingsport Docks guy." My heart stopped. There he was, my father, standing in front of a backdrop of cargo cranes and steel containers, smiling like a man who owned the ocean. Reporters crowded him as he spoke into the microphones. "Kingsport Docks is not just a port. he said. "It's a legacy, a gift from our ancestors, a testament to the Hale family's vision." Legacy. Ancestors. I felt heat rising in my chest. He spoke of honor, tradition, and heritage, while the dishwasher rag in my hand trembled. Every word scratched at old wounds. What ancestors? What legacy? You stole my childhood and called it heritage? My grip tightened until the fabric twisted. I wanted to scream, but instead I watched silently as Richard Hale soaked in applause from the press. The world adored the man who threw his own daughter into the rain. A single thought sparked inside me. Small, sharp, hopeful in the most dangerous way. He doesn't know I'm coming. 1 week later, life gave me a narrow crack of light. I met Grace Donovan. They called her many things in the finance world: the Iron Queen, the Blade of Wall Street, the woman who never lost. She managed a multi-million-dollar hedge fund and had a reputation for turning startups into empires. Or ash. Most people feared her. Some worshipped her. I didn't know what to think when I first saw her. She walked into the co-working space in a tailored black coat, heels clicking like a metronome of power. People moved aside without being asked. I was working on a borrowed community laptop, rewriting parts of my failed pitch deck, when she stopped near my table. "Someone told me there's a girl here trying to build a maritime optimization platform." Her voice was cool, sharp. I swallowed. "That's me." She studied me with unblinking eyes. "You look too young to be in this game." "I've been in tougher games," I replied. The corner of her mouth lifted. "Good answer." She sat across from me without invitation, gesturing at my screen. "Show me." My hands shook as I opened my prototype diagrams. She went through every page, every line, every chart. She didn't interrupt, didn't sigh, didn't laugh like the investor had. When she finally leaned back, her expression was unreadable. "Your idea is too big," she said. My heart dropped. "But your mind," she added, "is bigger than your idea." I blinked. Grace folded her arms. "Listen carefully, Emily. Revenge through force is stupidity. Revenge through wealth." She tapped the table. "That's art." The words engraved themselves into my bones. She continued, "You don't destroy a man like your father through anger. You destroy him by becoming someone he fears." "How?" I whispered. "Simple. You outbuild him." Grace offered to mentor me, not because she pitied me, but because she saw potential wrapped in desperation. She assigned me reading lists, introduced me to case studies, reviewed my strategies with brutal honesty, and forced me to rebuild my product from scratch. One night, after a long session, she said, "Your model is too narrow. Ports are evolving. You need to think bigger." Bigger how? Smart ports, smart infrastructure, AI-powered harbor systems. The future isn't about tracking ships. It's about running the entire coastline. Her words flipped a switch in my head. That night, I stared at an empty digital whiteboard for hours before writing 2 words: Smart Harbor. And suddenly, everything aligned. Smart cranes, predictive maintenance, autonomous scheduling, real-time logistics for port managers, a brain for the entire coastline. This wasn't just a product, it was a weapon. One sharp enough to cut through the empire my father worshipped. I rebuilt my startup from the ashes, piece by piece. Every night, the co-working space emptied until only the janitor and I remained. I slept 3 hours a day, lived on instant noodles, used a borrowed laptop until my hands grew sore. But the prototype took shape. The vision solidified. The fire inside me blazed brighter than ever. The girl who couldn't pay rent was gone. The girl who pawned her laptop was gone. A new Emily rose, one built from grit, humiliation, hunger, and unbreakable clarity. Grace watched me work myself raw and finally said, "Now you're ready, not to win, but to fail better, and then better again, until they cannot deny you." She was right. Failure wasn't the end. It was preparation. And this new startup, my smart harbor system, wasn't just a project. It was destiny. It was the turning point. The first true step toward taking back everything the world stole from me. Not at the daughter he abandoned, but at the woman he should have feared all along. New York never slept, and now it wouldn't let me sleep either. But this time, the sleeplessness wasn't born from fear, hunger, or the terror of deadlines that once chased me down dark hallways of life. This was different. This was the insomnia of someone climbing too fast to look back. For 4 years, my life unfolded like a rapid-cut montage. Late-night coffees on cold desktops, endless lines of code glowing in the dark, whispered phone calls with Grace Donovan at 2 a.m., failed pitches in anonymous boardrooms, victories that lasted only long enough to push me to the next battle. Somewhere along the way, something changed inside me. Fear evaporated. Only precision remained. Smart Harbor System. A name that once existed only on a crumpled piece of paper in a Brooklyn apartment. Now it was the subject of every logistics conference from Asia to Europe. It started with Rotterdam asking for a test run, then Singapore, then Dubai, then Hamburg. Port directors watched the real-time optimization dashboard flash across their screens, and every single one of them asked the same question: how soon can we deploy this? This wasn't just a good product. It solved a decades-old problem no one dared to touch. And suddenly, tech reporters were scrambling to write about a woman they had never heard of, Emily Hale, the girl who learned survival before she learned innovation. One late afternoon in our modest 7th-floor office, Grace Donovan walked in with a folder. She placed it gently on my desk, the way a surgeon places a scalpel before changing someone's life. "Congratulations," she said, her smile sharp and knowing. "Donovan Capital will lead the Series A round, $20 million. And trust me, this is only the beginning." My hand trembled a little as I picked up the contract. Not because of the money, because I remembered every moment before this one. The nights in an abandoned warehouse, the years washing dishes at Blue Harbor Diner, the rain soaking through my clothes when Richard Hale threw me out with a suitcase that wasn't even completely mine. This wasn't triumph. This was reclamation. Grace looked at me long and hard. "Violence is for people who have nothing," she said. "But wealth, power, influence, that's how smart people take revenge." I didn't reply. I didn't have to. 2 months later, I stood inside my first Manhattan apartment. High ceilings, glass walls, a view that made the city look like a kingdom made of light. I walked to the mirror. Not the fogged, cracked mirror of public bathrooms I once used, but a tall, polished one reflecting a woman in a fitted black blazer, calm eyes, and a posture that didn't bend anymore. I stared at myself for a long moment, then whispered, "Emily, you didn't die." And for the first time in years, I laughed. Smart Harbor System kept spreading, faster than we could update the servers. Berlin signed, Paris negotiated, London hosted me like royalty. In every boardroom, I saw the same expression, executives leaning forward, listening more closely than they wanted to admit, because they knew a young woman who grew up being discarded was now quietly rewriting the industry. On a late flight from London back to New York, I opened my laptop. My 5-year plan stared back at me. At the very bottom, I typed a single line: "One day I will return to Kingsport." My chest tightened, not with fear, with purpose. One crisp autumn evening, my phone buzzed. A message from Grace, a link. When I opened it, my father's face, Richard Hale, filled the screen. Not the towering, iron-fisted man I remembered. This version looked older, swollen, carrying the weight of a kingdom collapsing on his back. The news anchor said it plainly. Kingsport Docks is drowning in debt, outdated systems, lost contracts, falling revenue. A logistics expert added, "If they don't undergo a complete restructuring, this port will collapse." I watched in silence. Then slowly, a smile curved across my lips. Not a cruel smile, a knowing one. "The first weakness," I whispered, "has finally appeared." I closed the laptop. stepped out onto the balcony, looked down at the glittering city that once ignored me, and now bowed to my innovation. I was a millionaire. I had influence. I had leverage. And the road back to Kingsport was finally opening. No one in Manhattan knew what I was truly working on during those sleepless nights. Not my engineers, not the interns, not even the journalists who romanticized my meteoric rise. Because this chapter of my life had nothing to do with innovation, AI, or global logistics. This chapter had one purpose, one target, one ghost I had carried for 10 long, brutal years. Kingsport Docks, the place that birthed my scar, and the place where I would write my victory. But revenge could not be emotional. Revenge had to be mathematical, cold, precise, executed like a surgeon cutting straight to the bone. So one quiet morning, while New York was just beginning to warm under a pale sunrise, I opened my laptop and started the process that would alter the course of my family's history. The internet makes it look too easy. Register an LLC in minutes. The website's promise. But my plan was not as simple as filling in a form. If I was going to take Kingsport, I couldn't let anyone, especially Richard Hale, trace a single fingerprint back to me. So I built an entity that didn't exist, and from it I built 6 more. A holding company in Delaware with nominee directors, a second shell in the Cayman Islands, a consultancy firm in Dublin, a logistics investment fund with a meaningless name, and 2 special-purpose vehicles branching off each other like shadows in a mirror. 7 layers of legal smoke, 7 layers of silence. Grace walked in as I was reviewing the final documents. She raised an eyebrow. "You're going through with it." I didn't look up. "I've been going through with it since the night he threw me out." Grace crossed her arms, her tone unreadable. "You understand, Emily. Once you begin acquiring, there's no turning back. You can't play with a kingdom and pretend you're not planning to rule it." I finally met her eyes. "I'm not here to rule," I said softly. "I'm here to reclaim what was stolen." Grace smiled the way only someone who had conquered empires could. "Then let's begin." Most people assumed Richard Hale owned Kingsport Docks outright. He acted like it. He spoke like it. He carried himself like a monarch carved out of iron and salt. But money never lies. And when I dug into the old records, the truth surfaced like a corpse rising from the seabed. Richard owned only 18%, and a collection of small shareholders who had lost faith long ago. Kingsport wasn't a kingdom. It was a fracturing democracy built on grudges and incompetence. And Richard Hale, with his pride, his temper, his blind arrogance, had spent the last decade burning every bridge he ever walked on. Shareholders disliked him. Executives resented him. Unions despised him, and the creditors were circling like vultures sensing a dying animal. Grace reviewed the cap table and let out a low whistle. "He's more vulnerable than I expected. One push and this whole empire collapses." I allowed myself the faintest smile. "Oh, I'm not pushing," I whispered. "I'm buying." My acquisition strategy had to be invisible, a ghost slipping through the cracks of a falling empire. First, I bought 2% through the Dublin consultancy, then another 4% through the Cayman Fund, then 3% through a UK broker who never asked questions as long as the fees cleared. Grace orchestrated everything, making phone calls with surgeon's precision. "Tell the family office in Zurich we only want voting shares. Bundle these transactions so the regulators think it's a pension expansion. Make sure Emily's name never appears, not even internally." And slowly, painfully, beautifully, the puzzle pieces began to align. Every time I purchased a block of shares, Richard lost a little more control. Every time another shareholder sold off in frustration, I grew stronger. Some nights I couldn't sleep, not because of fear, because of the exquisite tension of it all, without him sensing the collapse happening beneath his feet. Kingsport Docks suffers massive financial strain, CEO seeking emergency funding. Richard stood in front of the cameras, the same way he used to stand towering over me as a child. Except now he looked smaller, stiffer, shrinking into the weight of a failing empire. "We will recover," he insisted. "We have options. We have assets." But I knew desperation when I saw it. Grace called me that night. "He's going to sell, Emily. He has no choice." I nodded. "I'll be waiting." We predicted he'd try to sell 5%, maybe 6%. He sold 10%. 10% of his legacy. 10% of the port that once justified throwing a child into the rain. And every share he sold went straight into my hands. But he never knew. How could he? To him, it must have seemed like some faceless European logistics firm was simply making a bold investment. He had no idea that the girl he discarded like trash was now buying pieces of his empire with calm, merciless precision. The final acquisition was too significant to be handled remotely. It required in-person signatures, verification, and discreet negotiations far away from Wall Street eyes. So Grace and I flew to London. The meeting took place in a private conference room overlooking the Thames. A storm rolled across the sky, the kind that made the river look like black glass, shattered by lightning. 3 shareholders sat across the table, men in tailored suits who'd grown tired of Richard's arrogance. Their spokesperson, a silver-haired man named Drayton, leaned forward. "You're offering $40 million for the entire block," he said, "and you want full voting control transferred immediately?" "Yes," I answered. "And your identity?" he asked, studying me like a puzzle piece that didn't belong. "Our analysts still can't determine who you represent." Grace smiled before I could speak. "Our client values privacy, but she will handle this port far better than Richard ever has." Drayton considered this. Rain hammered against the windows. The storm outside matched the storm inside my chest. Finally, he extended his hand. "Then Kingsport is yours." My signature hit the page. 1 stroke of ink, 1 breath, 1 moment, 51% ownership, majority control, complete power. Everything went silent. The storm, the room, even my heartbeat. For the first time in my life, the Hale empire belonged not to him, but to me. Later that night, I stood alone on the balcony of our London penthouse. Big Ben glowed in the distance. Cars moved like veins of light beneath the rain. My reflection stared back at me in the glass. Older now, sharper, colder. Emily Hale, owner of Kingsport Docks. The words felt unreal, like reciting a prophecy that finally chose its moment to come true. But victory always unveils a deeper question, one darker than revenge itself. Now that I had the empire, what would I do with the man who once ruled it? I closed my eyes. "You are not a Hale. Get out of my house." My hands tightened around the balcony rail. I could destroy him, utterly, completely, legally, financially, professionally. I could take everything, strip him of his position, his power, his dignity. I had all the weapons now, and the world would call it business, not revenge. But a voice inside me, quieter, more fragile, whispered something else. "Is revenge enough? Or do you want an ending that means something?" Should I forgive him or finish him? No answer came, only the echo of the storm. Because some decisions are too heavy for lightning, too dark for thunder. Some decisions must be made in silence, and mine would reshape the future of Kingsport and the fate of the man who once shattered me. 20 years is enough time for an entire coastline to change. Buildings age, streets fade, people disappear, but the smell of the sea, sharp, salty, familiar, never forgets. When my car rolled into Kingsport that morning, the town seemed to hold its breath. The fisherman paused mid-net. The grocery owner froze with a crate of apples in his hands. Tourists stepped aside, sensing a shift they couldn't explain. And for a moment, the entire harbor went silent. The wind pushed through my hair, carrying the same cold bite it had the night I was thrown out with nothing but a half-broken suitcase. But now, instead of dragging me into the dark, the wind bowed, soft, steady, almost reverent. I stepped out of the car, heels touching Kingsport soil for the first time in 2 decades, and the town watched, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with awe, like it finally understood that the girl who left in the rain had returned as someone the world now whispered about. Before I could face the empire I now owned, I had to face something far more personal: the Blue Harbor Diner. The bell above the door chimed just as it always had, but everything inside had changed. New paint, new tables, a new menu. But the memories, those were carved into the walls. A young man approached me, drying his hands on a towel. "Can I help you, ma'am?" His eyes were sharp, kind, familiar. "You're John Marlowe's son," I said softly. He froze. "You knew my father." I nodded. Silence settled between us, the kind that carries weight. The young man swallowed. "My father, he talked about a girl, Emily, said she was the brightest thing he ever saw in this town." I exhaled slowly. He reached into a drawer, pulled out an old envelope yellowed at the edges. "He made me promise to give this to you if you ever came back." My fingers trembled just slightly as I took it. John's handwriting, messy, looping, unmistakable, covered the front. For Emily Hale. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Emily, if you're reading this, it means you survived the world, and I always knew you would. Some people are born to inherit a life. People like you are born to build one. You were never meant to stay small. Go make something so big the world has no choice but to look up." I folded the letter with both reverence and pain pressing against my ribs. "He believed in you," the young man whispered. I nodded. "I know, and I'll never forget it." As I stepped outside, the wind from the dock swept around me again, this time like a greeting. Not everyone in Kingsport had tried to break me. Some people had quietly held me together. The Kingsport Administrative Building loomed over the harbor, tall, rigid, and crumbling at the edges. It was supposed to represent authority. Now it looked like a monument to denial. Richard Hale was standing at the entrance when I arrived, flanked by 2 board assistants. His once imposing posture had withered over the years. His hair had thinned, his jaw sagged, and the fire in his eyes had dulled into something hollow. He didn't see me as his daughter. He didn't see me at all. To him, I was just another wealthy investor walking in with a tailored coat and a silent entourage. "Welcome to Kingsport," he said, offering a stiff, practiced smile. "We appreciate your interest in supporting our restructuring." I looked straight into his eyes. There was no recognition, not even a flicker of discomfort. Just business, just arrogance, just the shell of a man who once believed he was untouchable. "Of course," I replied smoothly. "I'd like to observe today's board meeting. I understand major changes are being discussed." He nodded, clueless. Yes, the board is eager for outside perspective." Outside perspective? He had no idea the storm was walking right beside him. As we walked into the building together, his voice droned on about operational issues, shipping contracts, debt restructuring. He thought he was educating me. He thought he had power. He had no idea. The boardroom of Kingsport Docks was exactly as I remembered it from stolen childhood glimpses. Dark wood, massive windows overlooking the harbor, a long table where men talked about the fate of workers while sipping expensive scotch. Today, everything was different. There were 12 seats. 11 executives looked impatient. One chair, the largest at the head of the table, remained empty. My chair. But Richard didn't know that. He walked to his usual spot and gestured to a mid-range seat. "Please, sit anywhere." Grace, standing behind me like a shadow of steel, raised an eyebrow. But I didn't move. The room quieted as I walked, not to the seat he offered, but to the one he had always taken. the head of the table. I pulled the chair back and sat with deliberate calm. The entire board stiffened. Richard blinked, confused, annoyed. "Excuse me," he said sharply. "That seat is reserved for the presiding," I interrupted gently. "For the majority shareholder, correct?" He hesitated. "Well, yes, but—" "Then I believe," I said, folding my hands. "I'm sitting exactly where I belong." Murmurs spread, papers shifted. Someone gasped softly. Richard stared at me, irritation turning to disbelief. "I'm sorry, who are you?" The question hung in the air like a blade. I met his gaze for the first time as an equal. No, never an equal. As the storm that had come to end his reign. "Who am I?" I repeated softly. I leaned forward, voice steady as steel. "My name is Emily Hale." His face went pale. The room froze. I watched the recognition hit him like a collapsing tower, brick by brick, impossible to stop. But I didn't look away. I didn't blink. I let him drown in the truth. "I am the largest shareholder of Kingsport," I continued, 51%. "Which means, Richard—" I paused, letting the weight settle like iron. "This company answers to me now." Silence. Total. Complete. Suffocating. Richard's breathing shook. "Emily?" I held his gaze without mercy. "Welcome to the new era of Kingsport, Mr. Hale." He looked up at me. The morning the storm finally broke, Kingsport Harbor was unnaturally quiet. Too quiet for a place built on the clang of steel and the roar of engines. The seagulls circled overhead as if sensing the shift in power that was about to unfold. Workers paused near loading cranes, whispering rumors that had spread like wildfire. The board was meeting. The future of the port would be decided today. Emily stepped out of the dark car, dressed in a black coat that cut sharply against the salt-white sky. Every step she took echoed against the pavement, controlled, steady, inevitable. 20 years ago, she had walked this ground as a cast-off, a bastard child pushed out like trash. Today, she walked as its majority owner. Richard arrived seconds later, storming out of his SUV with the desperation of a man who had sensed, too late, that the world he controlled was slipping through his fingers. His tie was askew, his face red. He shoved past the board members gathering at the entrance. "Who the hell called this emergency meeting?" he barked. "I did," Emily replied calmly, stepping into the doorway. Her voice was steady, unshaken, cold as the Atlantic in midwinter. Richard scoffed. "You again. Listen, sweetheart, investors observe, they don't command. Let's not pretend." But then he noticed it. The badges clipped to the board members' coats. The silent nods exchanged behind him, the unease in their eyes. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Inside the conference room, the long mahogany table gleamed under the cheap fluorescent lights. Emily took the seat at the head, the chair reserved for the controlling shareholder. Richard froze. "What do you think you're doing?" he growled. Emily folded her hands. "Exercising my rights." The room tensed. One of the older board members cleared his throat. "Richard, she owns 51%. Silence cracked open like thunder. Richard's jaw fell. "That's impossible. I would have known. I had first rights. Someone would have told me—" Emily met his eyes with a gaze sharp enough to cut him open. "You sold them to me," she said, piece by piece, while begging for liquidity. "No." He shook his head violently, gripping the back of a chair. "No, I sold to an offshore fund. Those weren't you." Emily smiled. "A mask is still a face. You just never bothered to look behind it." He lunged forward. "Tell me who helped you. Who set this up? Who manipulated my board?" Emily leaned back. "Richard, please, don't embarrass yourself more than you already have." A board member spoke. "Chairwoman Hale, shall we begin the vote?" Richard's face twisted. "She's not the chairwoman. I'm the CEO. My father ran this place. My grandfather. This port belongs to me. This port belongs to whoever has the vision to run it. And that has never been you." The meeting commenced. One by one, the board members raised their hands for removal, for change, for her. When the eighth hand lifted, the majority was sealed. Richard exploded. "You ungrateful snakes! After everything I've done, after all the years, after the sacrifices—" Emily stood, her shadow falling across the table. "Richard Hale," she said, "by unanimous vote, you are hereby removed from your position as CEO of Kingsport Harbor." He stared at her, trembling. "You little bastard. You half-blood parasite. You think you can take everything from me?" Emily didn't flinch. "You took everything from me first." Richard clawed for anything that could save him. "This is illegal. You have no basis for removal, no cause." Emily opened a leather folder and spread the documents slowly across the table, like laying out the pieces of a trap. "Fraudulent contracts with shell suppliers," she said coolly. "Leases signed at triple market rate, paid to companies you control. Unreported debts. Safety violations that nearly sank a cargo vessel last year. And this," she tapped the last sheet, "the lawsuit you paid to bury." The board members paled. "You lied," one whispered. "You risked the entire port," another added. Richard staggered backward. "These are fabricated. This is a hit job. She's trying to destroy me." Emily's voice stayed level. "You destroyed yourself. I merely collected the evidence." She projected photos on the screen, the kind that made reputations crumble. Workers injured because maintenance budgets were pocketed, shipment delays hidden under forged signatures, millions moved offshore, and the final blow, a video of Richard screaming at staff, intoxicated, threatening to fire an entire shift. The room froze in disgust. Richard whispered, broken, "This is a setup." Emily leaned forward. "The only thing I set up—" She paused, her voice a knife wrapped in silk. "Was your fall." No more discussion was needed. When the final vote occurred, every hand rose except his. Richard slammed his fist into the table. "You think she'll save this place? She's a nobody. She's a stray. She doesn't have the bloodline." Emily stood tall. "I don't need your blood. I have my own strength." The board chair, now the former chair, turned to her with respect. "Miss Hale, the port is yours to lead." Richard's legs gave out, and he collapsed into a chair, staring blankly at the documents that ended his era. It was over. The empire he bragged about on TV, the Kokruho legacy of generations, the power he wielded to crush everyone around him, gone in one morning. Word spread through Kingsport faster than ships cut through water. By the time Emily opened the balcony doors, the entire harbor workforce had gathered below. Forklifts paused mid-operation. Cranes hung still. Dozens, then hundreds, then nearly 1,000 eyes looked up at her. The wind whipped her hair as she stepped out. For a decade, workers had suffered under Richard's reign. For 20 years, they had whispered about the girl he cast out. Today, they witnessed her rise. Who is she? I've never seen her before. She looks like someone born to run this place. No, she looks like someone who fought for it. Behind her, Richard appeared, wild-eyed. Stop looking at her. I'm the one who built this port. Me, my family name is Hale. Kingsport exists because of us. Emily didn't turn around. She didn't need to. Her presence alone drowned him out. A camera drone hovered in the air, broadcasting the scene across local media. Emily placed both hands on the balcony railing. "People of Kingsport," she said, her voice steady, echoing across the water. "Today marks a new beginning." Below the balcony, workers stood around the tall maritime flagpole, the one that flew the Kingsport Harbor flag since Richard's grandfather's time. Emily held out a folder. "This port will no longer be defined by corruption and fear," she said. "It will be defined by innovation, fairness, and a future every one of you can take pride in." She signed the executive order with a single stroke. Workers immediately moved to the flagpole. Richard staggered forward. No, no, don't you dare, don't touch that flag. He tried to push past the guards, but they blocked him effortlessly. The rope was pulled. The Kingsport flag descended, slowly, symbolically, painfully for the man watching it fall. Richard dropped to his knees. "Please," he whispered, "not this. This is all I have left. It's my legacy, my ancestors." Emily turned to him at last. Her expression held no hatred, just truth, and an ending. "No, Richard," she said softly. "You're wrong." She nodded to the workers. The new flag unfurled, deep navy, silver crest, the emblem of rebirth. E.H. Maritime Group, Emily Hale Maritime Group. Her name, her future, her claim. She looked Richard in the eyes. "This was never your legacy," she said. "It was always my future." And with the wind carrying her words across the entire port, the flag rose into the sky, high, proud, irreversible. For the first time in her life, Emily wasn't someone's burden, someone's secret, someone's abandoned past. She was the ruler of the empire once used to destroy her. The crowd erupted into applause, and Richard Hale, the man who threw her out at 14 years old, could only watch as she walked past him, unreachable now, toward the empire she had won with her own hands. The revenge was complete, but the story was far from over. Dawn settled over Kingsport like a quiet confession. The first light touching the metal cranes, the ships, and the long stretch of sea that had carried both Emily's childhood nightmares and her adult ambitions. The port was finally hers, or so everyone believed. But they were wrong. The truth was far more complicated, far more calculated, far more dangerous. And today she would finally reveal it. Most people thought Emily stopped at 51%, just enough to seize control. They were wrong. Behind closed doors, behind layers of legal smokescreens, Emily owned 72% of Kingsport Harbor. Not because of greed, not because she wanted to crush Richard further, not even because of revenge. She bought that much because she knew the board would eventually turn on her, just as they had turned on her father, on each other, and on anyone who challenged the status quo. Power was never safe in the hands of fragmented loyalty. If you want to protect something, own it so completely that no one can take it away. So she bought every weak shareholder's stake quietly, every distressed investor, every silent partner tired of Richard's chaos, every small slice in divorce settlements or old family trusts. She bought them not to dominate Kingsport, but to protect it, to protect the workers who had been exploited, to protect the harbor that had held the town together, to protect the legacy she chose to build, not inherit. If she held 51%, someone could challenge her. At 60%, she could still be forced to negotiate. At 72%, she was untouchable. No hostile takeover, no boardroom coup, no repeat of Richard's mistakes. Control was no longer a battlefield. It was a fortress, and she stood alone at the top. There was another reason, a darker one. The world never knew. The truth Emily discovered during her offshore investigations. Years ago, when she was a child, long before she knew what stock or capital or leveraged assets were, Richard had tried to sell Kingsport Harbor to a criminal syndicate operating under the guise of a European logistics company, the Mafia. Desperate for cash, drowning in early debts, Richard had been ready to hand over the entire port in exchange for a bailout that would keep him in power. If the deal had gone through, the town would have been swallowed. Smuggling, trafficking, corruption embedded into every crate and ship. Kingsport would have rotted from the inside, but the deal collapsed. The Mafia wanted more control than Richard had promised. The documents were buried. The board never knew. The workers never knew. No one knew, except Emily. She found the paper trail years later while tracing Richard's missing accounts in her early acquisition phase. Messy bank transfers, meetings at offshore hotels, coded communications that screamed of desperation. Her revenge was never just personal. Her victory wasn't only hers. She wasn't just avenging her past. She was saving Kingsport's future. The 72% wasn't proof of vengeance. It was proof of responsibility. She didn't take the port away from Richard. She prevented him, finally, from destroying it. The afternoon after the vote, Emily walked past the CEO's office, the office that had once symbolized everything she feared, hated, and vowed to reclaim. Now it was a hollow room. Richard sat alone inside, the door half open as if even it had given up resisting gravity. The desk was empty, the walls stripped of their framed certificates, the blinds drawn, leaving shadows across his face. He wasn't crying. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't fighting anymore. He was silent. Because Richard Hale had never cared about wealth. Money was replaceable. Assets could be rebuilt. Even reputations, he believed, could be repurchased. Power was his oxygen, and Emily had taken every last breath. It was mine, all mine, the port, the people, the name. His fingers trembled. He looked smaller than she had ever seen him, not a tyrant, not a monster, just a fragile man who had mistaken control for love. He had lost not his empire, but the illusion that he deserved one. Emily stepped into the doorway. Richard didn't look up at first. When he finally did, it was slow, exhausted. He stared at her as if seeing her for the very first time. "You planned this," he said quietly. It wasn't an accusation, just a dying realization. All of it. Every step. Emily nodded. "Yes. Why?" His voice cracked. "Why destroy me?" "I didn't destroy you," she replied. "You did that yourself." He swallowed hard. For a moment, he looked almost human. "Was it because I threw you out?" he asked. "Because I called you a mistake? A burden? Because I—" "No," Emily said gently. "That was just the beginning of your cruelty, not the reason for your fall." She stepped closer, her voice steady, almost soft. "You didn't lose because I became richer. You didn't lose because I took the port. You didn't lose because of revenge." She looked him directly in the eyes, calm, unshaken, resolute. "You lost because you never knew how to love anything. Not this port, not this town, not even your own blood." Richard blinked, stunned. Emily continued, "I bought 72% not to humiliate you, but to save Kingsport from you, from what you were trying to sell it to, from what you could have turned it into." He stared at her in disbelief. "You saved it?" Emily nodded. "And I saved you from letting the mafia destroy everything your ancestors built. Not for you, for the people out there who deserve better." Richard's face collapsed with the weight of truth. Not anger, not hatred, just regret. A lifetime of what-ifs reflected in his eyes. Emily stepped back. "This is the last time we speak as enemies," she told him. "The rest is your choice. What you do next, who you become after this, that's on you." She turned toward the door. "Emily, I never hated you. She paused. "I know," she said without turning around. "And that's why you lost." Then she walked away. When Emily stepped outside, the horizon had just begun to split into colors, gold, rose, and a pale silver that shimmered on the waves. The first real sunrise over Kingsport she had seen in decades. Workers were back on shift. Ships were moving. The harbor hummed with new life. The flag of E.H. Maritime Group fluttered boldly above the cranes, catching the morning wind. She stood on the balcony for a moment, letting the sea air wash over her, letting the past finally settle, letting the future open. For the first time, she wasn't running, wasn't fighting, wasn't surviving. She was becoming. Behind her, the old world had fallen. Before her, the new world waited. It's done. The wind carried the words into the sunrise, a symbol of rebirth, a beginning born from ashes, a future claimed by courage, strategy, and a mind sharp enough to rewrite destiny, and built an empire from the ruins. The morning the world finally felt still, Emily stepped onto the deck of the newly restored Kingsport flagship vessel, a sleek, white luxury yacht that cut through the sunlight like a blade of possibility. It wasn't extravagance. It wasn't triumph. It was something else entirely. It was the first time in 20 years she was leaving Kingsport not as a runaway, not as a survivor, not as a girl exiled from her father's home, but as the owner of the ocean she once feared. The dock workers paused to watch her, murmuring with respect. Some had known her since she was a child. Some only knew her as the woman who saved their jobs. But all of them understood this moment was more than ceremonial. It was reclamation. Emily placed her hand on the throttle. The engine hummed, a low, powerful vibration that felt like a heartbeat syncing with her own. She eased the yacht forward. The bow sliced through the water. Waves curled back in perfect arcs. Sunlight glittered across the sea like broken diamonds. The salt wind lifted her hair as the ship glided away from the port, her port, now flying the banner of E.H. Maritime Group high above the cranes. For a moment, she closed her eyes. She let the ocean carry her. No fear, no rage, no burdens, just motion, just freedom, just the quiet realization that she had climbed out of a nightmare and into a life she built with her own hands. And the world, finally, felt wide open. As the yacht moved farther out, Kingsport shrinking behind her, the memories began to unfold. Not as wounds, but as a film she watched without trembling. She saw the girl she used to be, 15, standing in the rain, hair drenched against her cheeks, carrying a suitcase thrown at her feet. "You're not a Hale. Get out of my house." And she saw that same girl sleeping in abandoned warehouses, eating cold soup, staring at the harbor lights from a distance. Don't give up. Then came New York, the chaos, the overload, the exhaustion, studying in cramped rooms, running between jobs, learning finance, code, markets, trying to outrun her past and outrun hunger at the same time. She remembered the pitch rooms where they laughed at her, the landlord banging on her door, the nights she believed she would break, John Marlowe's belief in her, Grace Donovan's mentorship, her first startup, her first failure, her first victory, her first million, her first 100 million. Each moment flickered like scenes from a documentary she had seen too many times, but no longer feared. Then the final battle, Richard's collapse, the boardroom votes, the flag being lowered, her name rising in its place, her footsteps echoing through hallways that once swallowed her screams. She didn't become powerful because she wanted revenge. She became powerful because she wanted freedom. The girl in the rain had become the woman steering a ship through the open sea. When the yacht reached deep water, Emily turned off the engines. The ocean rocked her gently as she leaned over the railing, letting the breeze kiss her face. She took out her phone. Her public account had grown to millions. Entrepreneurs, CEOs, young women who saw her as a symbol of resilience. Reporters, investors, global trade leaders. She opened her camera with a small, tired smile. For a moment, she wasn't Emily Hale, the powerful CEO. She wasn't the owner of the East Coast's most strategic port. She wasn't the woman who toppled a dynasty. She was just Emily, a girl who once had nothing but a vow. The screen lit up. She clicked record. The tone of her voice was calm. No theatrics, no drama, just truth. "Hey everyone," she said softly. "Today marks a new chapter, not for me, but for Kingsport." She turned the camera to the horizon, the port glowing faintly behind her. As of this morning, Kingsport Harbor will begin its transformation into the East Coast's first green, clean, fully tech-integrated seaport. A port that respects the ocean, a port that protects our workers, a port that serves the future, not the past. Her voice warmed. This isn't about profit. This isn't about revenge. It's about building something better, something lasting. She breathed, steady and full. And for the first time in 20 years, I'm finally breathing too. She stopped recording. Kingsport will become the cleanest, greenest, most technologically advanced harbor on the East Coast. Emily Hale, CEO EH. Within minutes, comments exploded. Thousands of likes, dozens of news outlets reposting, reaction videos forming already. You can rewrite your story. Emily set the phone aside and looked out at the endless blue. The ocean was calm, the wind warmer now, the sun rising strong. She let out a slow breath, a breath she had been holding for 2 decades without realizing it. Not a triumphant laugh, not an aggressive smirk, just a soft, honest smile. I made it. Revenge is done. Her fingers trailed along the yacht's railing. Now it's time to live. The yacht drifted forward as if pulled by destiny. Water parted gently ahead, as though making way for a woman who had earned her space in the world 1,000 times over. Emily Hale didn't look back again, not because she hated her past, but because she finally didn't need to. The horizon awaited, a blank canvas, a future unwritten, and Emily, finally free, sailed toward it.